When Emma Chen discovers she's been sold to corporate predator Adrian Blackwood like a piece of property, she thinks she knows exactly who the villain is. But in the glass towers of Manhattan's most elite circles, nothing is what it seems, and everyone has blood on their hands. Welcome back, beautiful people. Today's story is equal parts drama and devotion, and trust us, you'll be hooked from the very first line. Ready? Let's begin. Asterisk, the champagne flute shattered against the marble wall of the Sterling Tower's 42nd floor, crystal fragments catching the dying Manhattan sunlight like scattered diamonds. Emma Chen watched the Dom Perignon drip down the pristine white surface, her chest heaving with the kind of rage that made rational thought impossible. 3 years, she whispered, her voice carrying the weight of betrayal across the silent boardroom. 3 years of my life poured into Meridian Holdings, and you sold it to him like livestock at auction. Richard Sterling, her former mentor and father figure, couldn't meet her eyes. His weathered hands trembled as he reached for another glass, the ice clinking like wind chimes in a graveyard. The man who had pulled her from the wreckage of her parents' failed business empire now looked like a stranger wearing his face. Emma, you have to understand. Understand what? She stepped closer, her designer heels clicking against the polished granite. The scent of his expensive cologne mixed with the metallic temps of her own fury. That you promised me partnership, and gave me to Adrian Blackwood instead? That everything I built, every client I fought for, every sleepless night I spent saving this company, was just currency in your retirement fund? The panoramic windows framed Manhattan's golden hour, skyscrapers, piercing the amber sky like accusatory fingers. Somewhere in that urban maze, Adrian Blackwood was probably celebrating his newest acquisition. The thought made Emma's stomach churn with a mixture of humiliation and something darker she refused to name. Richard finally looked up, his gray eyes clouded with guilt and something that might have been fear. He would have destroyed us both if I hadn't agreed. You don't know what he's capable of? I know exactly what he's capable of. Emma's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow felt more dangerous than screaming. I've watched him dismantle companies like ours for sport, seen grown men weep after 5 minutes in his presence. And now you've gift-trapped me for his entertainment. She turned toward the windows, watching the city's pulse below. Yellow cabs crawled through arteries of asphalt, their honking a distant symphony of chaos. People hurried along sidewalks like ants, each carrying their own secrets and wounds. None of them knew that Emma Chen's carefully constructed world had just imploded in a boardroom overlooking their struggles. There's something else, Richard said behind her, his voice barely audible. Emma closed her eyes, feeling the weight of another revelation settling on her shoulders like a lead blanket. What else could you possibly have done? The non-compete clause. It's ironclad for 18 months. She can't work for any firm in the city. His words fell like stones into still water, each one creating ripples of consequence. He specifically requested that provision. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the building's mechanical heartbeat and the distant hum of traffic far below. Emma felt something shift inside her chest, a fundamental alteration in the architecture of her being. The naive. A woman who had walked into this boardroom an hour ago was gone, replaced by someone harder, more calculating. So he doesn't just want my company, she said, her reflection ghostly in the window glass. He wants me broken and desperate. Emma, no. She turned back to face Richard, and he flinched at whatever he saw in her expression. You've said enough. You've done enough. She gathered her purse and portfolio, movements precise and controlled despite the earthquake in her chest. At the door, she paused without looking back. When Adrian Blackwood asks how I took the news, tell him I smiled. The elevator descended through the building's steel and concrete spine, each floor marking her transition from victim to something else entirely. By the time she reached the lobby's marble expanse, Emma had made her decision. Adrian Blackwood wanted to play games with her life. She would make sure he regretted ever learning her name. The autumn air bit at her cheeks as she stepped onto the sidewalk, Manhattan's energy crackling around her like electricity. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Looking forward to our first meeting tomorrow, 9 a.m. sharp. Disappoint me. Emma stared at the message, then slowly smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression, and the businessman hurrying past her actually stepped sideways to avoid whatever he glimpsed in her face. She typed back quickly, "I've never disappointed anyone in my life, though I suspect you'll be an exception to many rules." His response came immediately. Intriguing. "I do enjoy breaking things that appear unbreakable." Emma pocketed her phone and walked into the gathering dusk, her heels echoing off concrete and glass. Tomorrow, she would meet the man who had orchestrated her professional destruction. Tonight, she would prepare for war. Above her, office lights began flickering on in the Sterling Tower's upper floors, each window a golden eye watching her retreat. In one of those windows, she knew Adrian Blackwood was probably standing, looking down at the city he'd spent years conquering piece by piece. He had no idea that his latest acquisition came with thorns sharp enough to draw blood. Adrian Blackwood's office occupied the corner of the 47th floor, a temple of black marble and floor-to-ceiling windows that transformed Manhattan into his personal diorama. Emma had expected opulence, but not this austere beauty that spoke of a mind comfortable with both power and solitude. He didn't look up when she entered at exactly 9 a.m. His dark head was bent over a document, expensive pen moving across paper with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. The morning light caught the silver threading through his black hair, a stark reminder that he'd earned his reputation over years of calculated destruction. "Punctual," he said without raising his eyes. I appreciate that quality, though. I suspect it's the only conventional thing about you, Miss Chen." Emma remained standing, studying him with the intensity of a chess player analyzing her opponent's opening move. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe 5, with the kind of severe handsomeness that belonged in Renaissance paintings. His charcoal suit was impeccably tailored, but she noticed the slight tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers gripped the pen just a fraction too tightly. "You're disappointed," she said. That got his attention. Adrian looked up, and Emma felt the full force of his gaze like a physical impact. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, gray-green and unpredictable. They swept over her face with clinical interest, as if she were a specimen under glass. Should I be? Most people expect their acquisitions to arrive trembling with gratitude, or seething with impotent rage. Emma moved closer to his desk, her heels silent on the Persian rug that probably cost more than her annual salary. "I suspect you're accustomed to both reactions." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, there and gone, like lightning. "And which are you offering?" "Neither."
"Oh."
She settled into the chair across from his desk without invitation, crossing her legs and fixing him with a steady stare. "Offering you a proposition." Adrian set down his pen and leaned back, fingers steepled beneath his chin. The gesture should have looked relaxed, but Emma caught the predatory stillness in his posture. This was a man who had learned to be dangerous while appearing at ease. "You have my attention. I know why you bought Meridian Holdings." The words came out steady, despite the hammering of her heart. It wasn't about the client list or the prime real estate. "You wanted to destroy Richard Sterling, and you used me as the weapon." An astute observation.
Why?"
His voice carried no shame, only a cold acknowledgement of fact. "Sterling cost me something precious once. I've waited 15 years to return the favor." Emma filed that information away. Another piece in the puzzle of Adrian Blackwood. What he costs you must have been significant to warrant such an elaborate revenge. Something flickered across Adrian's face, too quick to interpret but unmistakably painful. When he spoke again, his voice had acquired a razor's edge. "Some debts can only be paid in kind." The office fell silent except for the distant hum of Manhattan awakening below them. Emma could smell the faint trace of his cologne, something expensive and masculine that seemed to complement the dangerous energy radiating from him. She found herself studying the sharp line of his jaw, the way his dark lashes cast shadows on his cheekbones when he looked down. "Here's my proposition," she said, forcing herself to focus. "You want someone to suffer for Sterling's sins? I want revenge for being used as collateral damage. Let's help each other." Adrian's eyebrows rose fractionally. "You want revenge against the man who raised you after your parents died?" The casual knowledge of her history should have surprised her, but Emma had expected him to know everything worth knowing about his newest weapon. Richard Sterling stopped being my father figure. The moment he sold me to settle his debts, now he's just another obstacle between me and what I want. And what do you want, Miss Chen? The question hung in the air like incense, heavy with possibility. Emma leaned forward slightly, close enough to see the gold flecks in Adrian's storm-colored eyes. I want what you have. Power. Independence. The ability to destroy anyone who tries to use me again. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. I want to learn from the best predator in the city. Adrian was quiet for so long that Emma began to wonder if she'd overplayed her hand. Then he stood, moving around the desk with the fluid grace of someone comfortable in his own skin. He stopped directly in front of her chair, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. You think you can handle learning from me? His voice was silk over steel. The process tends to break people. I'm not most people. No, he agreed, reaching out to brush a strand of hair from her cheek with surprising gentleness. You're not? The touch sent electricity racing down her spine, and Emma found herself frozen between the desire to lean into his hand and the instinct to flee, or something magnetic about Adrian Blackwood, a gravity that pulled at everything in his orbit. She understood now how he'd built his empire, not just through intelligence and ruthlessness, but through this indefinable charisma that made people want to surrender their better judgment. If you work with me, he said, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone, there's no going back. Once you cross certain lines, you can't pretend to be innocent again. Emma caught his wrist, her fingers circling the expensive watch that adorned it. His pulse was steady beneath her touch, but she felt him tense at the contact. I stopped being innocent the day Richard sold me to pay his debts, she said. The question is whether you're brave enough to help me become something dangerous. Adrian's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. He withdrew his hand slowly, deliberately, and Emma felt the loss of his warmth, like a physical ache. Welcome to your education, Miss Chen. He returned to his chair, suddenly all business again. Your first lesson begins now. He pressed it. Button on his desk, and moments later, the door opened to admit a severe-looking woman in an impeccable gray suit. Margaret will show you to your office and explain your new responsibilities. You'll be working closely with me on all major acquisitions, starting with the Morrison account. Morrison Holdings was one of Sterling's oldest clients, a family business that Richard had nurtured for decades. You're planning to destroy them too. I'm planning to acquire them, Adrian corrected. What happens after that depends on how well you've learned your lessons. As Emma followed Margaret toward the door, she heard Adrian's voice behind her, soft and promising as a threat. Oh, and Miss Chen, hope you weren't too attached to your current apartment. You'll be moving into the company penthouse tonight. I like to keep my most valuable assets close. The door closed behind her with a soft click, but Emma could feel Adrian's gaze burning into her back long after she'd left his presence. She'd thought she was playing chess, but she was beginning to realize she'd walked into a game with rules she didn't understand. The only question now was whether she'd survive. Long enough to learn them? The penthouse apartment occupied the entire 52nd floor, a sprawling canvas of steel and glass that made Emma feel like she was living inside a cloud. 3 weeks had passed since she'd moved in, 3 weeks of watching Adrian's methods. With the fascinated horror of someone witnessing a master craftsman work with human destruction as his medium, she stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows now, watching the city pulse below while nursing a glass of wine that probably cost more than her old monthly rent. The apartment was beautiful in an antiseptic way, all clean lines and neutral colors, but it felt like a gilded cage. Even the artwork seemed chosen to intimidate rather than comfort. You're brooding again. Emma didn't turn around, but she felt Adrian's presence fill the room like a change in atmospheric pressure. He'd been working late again, orchestrating the systematic dismantling of Morrison Holdings with the patience of a spider spinning its web. I'm thinking, she corrected, taking another sip of wine. There's a difference. His reflection appeared. In the window beside hers, tall and imposing even in the wavering glass. He'd loosened his tie and rolled up his shirt sleeves, revealing strong forearms marked with old scars she'd never asked about. The sight of him in this more relaxed state. Did something dangerous to her equilibrium? About Morrison? Emma nodded, though her thoughts had been far from business. She'd been thinking about the way Adrian's eyes softened when he thought no one was looking, about the nightmares that woke him at 3 a.m., about the careful distance he maintained between them, despite the electric tension that crackled whenever. They were in the same room. They'll be bankrupt within the month, she said. The family will lose everything they've built over 4 generations. Yes, Adrian agreed without inflection. And you feel nothing about that? I feel satisfaction. He moved closer, and Emma caught the scent of his cologne mixed with something darker, more human. They made their choice when they refused my initial offer. I'm simply following through on the consequences. Emma turned to face him, searching his expression for some crack in the marble facade, even knowing that James Morrison has 3 children under 10, that his wife is battling cancer. For just a moment, something flickered in Adrian's eyes. Pain, perhaps, or memory. Then it was gone, buried beneath layers of practiced indifference. Sentiment is a luxury I can't afford, he said. Either can you if you want to survive in this world? Is that what happened to you? The question slipped out before Emma could stop it. Did someone teach you that caring was weakness? Adrian went very still, his entire body radiating sudden tension. When he spoke, his voice was dangerously quiet. What did you say? Emma knew she should back down, apologize, retreat behind safer conversational boundaries. Instead, she stepped closer, close enough to see the gold flecks in his gray-green eyes, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his skin. I said, did someone break you so thoroughly that you think destruction is the only path to power? The silence stretched between them like a tightrope. Emma could see the war playing out across Adrian's features, fury warring with something more vulnerable, the urge to strike back, battling with what might have been recognition. You know nothing about what broke me, he said finally. Then tell me. Why? His voice was sharp enough to draw blood, so you can use it against me later. So you can find the weakness in my armor and exploit it when it serves your purposes. Emma reached out without thinking, her fingers grazing the line of his jaw. He flinched at the contact but didn't pull away, and she felt the tremor that ran through him at her touch. Because I think you're tired of carrying whatever poison. Someone fed you, she whispered. Because I recognize the look in your eyes when you think no one's watching. It's the same one I see in my own mirror. Adrian's hand came up to cover hers, his fingers warm and slightly calloused. For a moment, Emma thought he might actually let her in, might trust her with whatever wound had shaped him into this beautiful, terrible man. Then her phone rang. The sound shattered the moment like a gunshot, and Adrian stepped back so quickly that Emma almost stumbled. She fumbled for the device, her hands shaking slightly as she answered. Emma Chen. Emma, thank God. Richard Sterling's voice was thick with panic, and something that might have been tears. You have to help me. It's destroying everything. Morrison, the Henderson account, even the charity foundation. He won't stop until there's nothing left. Emma's eyes met Adrian's across the room, and she saw something cold and satisfied in his expression. This was what he'd been waiting for, the moment when her former mentor would come crawling, begging for mercy that would never come. I told you what would happen if you betrayed me, Adrian said, loud enough for Richard to hear through the phone. I keep my promises, Sterling. Emma, please? Richard's voice cracked. I know I hurt you, but you can stop this. You're the only one he might listen to. Emma looked at Adrian, at the man who'd given her power and purpose and something dangerously close to understanding. Then she thought of Richard, who'd raised her from adolescence, who taught her everything she knew about business and loyalty and love. I can't help you, she said into the phone, her voice steady despite the earthquake in her chest. You made your choice. Now live with the consequences. She hung up and set the phone aside, feeling something fundamental shift inside her. The last bridge to her old life was burning, and she'd struck the match herself. Well done, Adrian said, his voice warm with approval. I wasn't sure you'd be able to do it. Emma turned to face him, and the expression on her face made him take a step back. You orchestrated this. I orchestrated what? The timing? The phone call? You made sure Richard would call while we were together, while I was emotional and vulnerable. You wanted me to choose sides in front of you. Adrian's silence was answer enough. Emma laughed. but there was no humor in it. And I actually thought you might trust me enough to tell me about your past. I thought maybe we'd moved beyond games and manipulation. Emma, no. She held up a hand and he stopped speaking. You want to know the difference between you and me, Adrian? I'm still capable of change. You're just a beautiful machine programmed for destruction and incapable of anything else. She walked toward the bedroom, pausing at the threshold to look back at him. He stood frozen in the living room, his perfect composure finally cracking around the edges. Your plan worked, she said. I chose you over Richard. But I want you to remember something when you're celebrating your victory. I didn't choose you because I trust you or care about you. I chose you because I'm learning to be just as ruthless as you are. And that means someday when you least expect it, I'm going to destroy you the same way you've destroyed everyone else. She closed the bedroom door behind her, leaving Adrian alone with the weight of his hollow triumph. Through the thin walls, she could hear him pour himself a drink, then another. Later, much later, she heard the sound of breaking glass in his voice calling her name like a prayer or a curse. But Emma didn't answer. She lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling and wondering if this was how it felt to sell your soul. Not all at once in a grand gesture, but piece by piece, choice by choice. Until one day you woke up and realized you'd become exactly the kind of person you once swore you'd never be. The document in Emma's hands felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. She read it again, then a third time, hoping the words would somehow rearrange themselves into something that didn't confirm her worst suspicions. But the truth remained stark and undeniable. Adrian had been planning her destruction from the moment they met. The rain hammered against the windows of his office. Manhattan blurred into watercolor smears beyond the glass. Emma had come in early, using her keycard access to search for answers to questions that had been eating at her for weeks. She'd found more than she bargained for. The file was labeled simply Chen E. Inside were photographs, financial records, psychological evaluations in a detailed timeline spanning back 15 years. Everything was there. Her parents' business failure, Richard's subsequent guardianship, her academic achievements, her relationships, even her favorite coffee order. At the bottom of the stack was a memo in Adrian's handwriting that made her blood turn to ice. Subject shows optimal combination of intelligence, ambition, and emotional vulnerability. Recommend proceeding with acquisition and gradual psychological conditioning. Father figure's betrayal will provide necessary trauma. Foundation for a complete loyalty transfer. Estimated timeline for full conversion, 6 to 8 months. Conversion. As if she were some kind of religious experience rather than a person with thoughts and feelings and dreams that apparently meant nothing to him. You're in early. Emma didn't look. Up from the file, she'd heard Adrian's approach, the whisper of his expensive shoes on marble. But she couldn't bring herself to meet his eyes. Not yet. I couldn't sleep, she said, her voice carefully neutral. I thought I'd get some work done. Adrian moved around the desk, and she felt him notice the open file, felt his entire body go rigid with realization. The silence that followed was pregnant with the weight of exposed truth. Emma, he said carefully, how long? She finally looked up, and whatever he saw in her expression made him take a step back. How long have you been planning this? Adrian's face had gone pale beneath his tan, but his voice remained steady. It's not what you think, really. Emma stood, holding up the psychological evaluation. Guess this suggests you've been manipulating me since before we even met. It suggests that everything we've shared, every moment of connection, every time I thought we were building something real, it's been part of some elaborate psychological experiment that's not stop. The word cracked like a whip. Don't you dare lie to me. Not now. I've read every page, Adrian. I know about the surveillance, the staged encounters, even the apartment you had prepared for me before we'd ever spoken. You've been orchestrating my entire life. Adrian sank into his chair as if the weight of his sins had finally become too heavy to carry standing up. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. It started that way. And how does it end? Emma's voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. What's the end game? Do you get bored and discard me? Do you turn me into another broken toy for your collection? I don't know. The admission seemed to surprise him as much as it did her. The plan changed. when Adrian looked up at her, and for the first time since she'd known him, his carefully constructed mask had completely fallen away. She could see the man beneath the monster, vulnerable and raw and desperately human. When I realized I was falling in love with you, the words hit Emma like a physical blow she'd been prepared for. More manipulation, more lies, but not for this quiet confession that sounded like it had been torn from his throat. "Don't," she whispered. "I know it doesn't change anything," Adrian continued, his voice gaining strength. "I know what I did was unforgivable, but you asked for the truth, and that's it. Somewhere between your first week here and last night, everything I thought I knew about myself got turned upside down." Emma laughed, but it sounded more like a sob. "You don't even know what love is. You just described me as a psychological experiment. You documented my emotional responses like a scientist studying lab rats." "I did." Adrian's honesty was brutal in its simplicity, because that's all I knew how to do. That's all anyone ever taught me. And what about now? Emma moved closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow felt more dangerous than screaming. "What's the difference between manipulation and love, Adrian? How do I know this isn't just another move in whatever game you're playing?" Adrian stood, closing the distance between them until they were only inches apart. Emma could see the gold flecks in his eyes, the tension in his jaw, the way his hands trembled slightly as he reached for her. "Because I'm giving you the power to destroy me," he said. "That file contains everything you'd need to ruin me completely. My methods, my weaknesses, every dirty secret I've accumulated over the years. You could take it to the authorities, too. The press to my competitors. You could watch my empire burn and walk away clean." Emma stared at him, searching for the deception, the angle, the hidden trap. But all she saw was a man offering his throat to the wolf he'd created. "Why would you do that?" "'Cause I'd rather lose everything than lose you believing that what we have isn't real." His voice broke on the last word. "Because I love you enough to let you choose revenge over forgiveness." The rain continued its assault on the windows. The only sound in a room thick with 15 years' worth of secrets and lies and desperate truths. Emma felt the weight of the file in her hands, felt the power Adrian had just handed her, felt the terrible burden of having to decide what kind of person she wanted to become. "There's something else you need to know," she said finally. Adrian's eyes searched her face. "What?" Emma reached into her purse and pulled out a small digital recorder. The red light indicated it had been running for the past 20 minutes. "I've been recording you," she said. "Every conversation, every business meeting, every quiet moment we've shared. I've documented everything." Adrian's face went white. "Emma, I was going to use it against you," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "I was going to bring you down the same way you brought down everyone else. But then I realized something." "What?" Emma pressed the stop button on the recorder and set it on the desk beside the file. "I realized that destroying you wouldn't make me feel better. It would just make me like you." They stood facing each other across 3 feet of space that might as well have been an ocean. Emma could see the hope and terror warring in Adrian's eyes, could feel the weight of this moment pressing down on them both, like the storm clouds gathering outside. "So what happens now?" Adrian asked. Emma picked up the file and walked to the fireplace that occupied one corner of his office. She struck a match and held it to the papers, watching 15 years of surveillance and manipulation curl into ash and smoke. "Now we find out if love can survive the truth," she said. Behind her, she heard Adrian's sharp intake of breath, felt him move closer until his warmth was pressed against her back. His arms came around her waist, tentative and desperate, and she leaned into him despite every rational thought, screaming that she was making a mistake. "I love you," he whispered against her hair. "I know I don't deserve it, but I love you more than I've ever loved anything." Emma turned in his arms, looking up into his face. "Prove it. How?" "Help me save Richard." The words hung between them like a challenge, and Emma watched as understanding dawned in Adrian's eyes. He was being asked to choose between his 15-year quest for revenge and the woman who'd somehow managed to crack through his armor and find whatever humanity he had left. "Emma," he said carefully, "you don't know what you're asking." "Know exactly what I'm asking," she replied. "I'm asking you to be better than what was done to you. I'm asking you to break the cycle. Outside, Thunder rolled across the city like the voice of an angry god. Inside Adrian's office, two damaged people held each other and tried to believe that love might be stronger than the wounds that had shaped them. But neither of them saw the figure watching from the building across the street or the telephoto, lens capturing their embrace, or the satisfied smile on Richard Sterling's face as he finally found the weapon he needed to destroy them both. The photographs were spread across Richard Sterling's desk like tarot cards predicting doom. Emma stared at images of herself and Adrian in moments of intimacy, sharing coffee at dawn. His hand on her cheek, their embrace by the fireplace after burning the surveillance file. Each image was a violation, a theft of something private and sacred. "You had us followed," she said, her voice hollow with disbelief. Richard leaned back in his chair, looking older than his 60 years but still sharp around the edges. His office felt smaller than she remembered, shabby compared to Adrian's marble cathedral. The smell of stale coffee and broken dreams hung in the air like incense. "I had to know if you were truly lost or if there was still hope for salvation," he said. "These pictures tell me everything I need to know." Emma's hands clenched into fists. "They tell you that I'm happy, that for the first time in months, I've found something worth protecting. They tell me that Adrian Blackwood has completed his psychological conditioning," Richard corrected. "Do you think you're the first brilliant woman he's seduced and destroyed? Do you think your connection is special?" The words hit like physical blows, but Emma forced herself to remain steady. She'd come here to confront Richard about his own betrayals, to demand answers about why he'd sold her to Adrian in the first place. Instead, she was walking into another trap. "Show me the others," she said. Richard's eyebrows rose. "Excuse me? I'm just another conquest in a pattern. Show me the evidence. Show me the other women he supposedly destroyed." Richard's silence was telling. Emma felt a grim satisfaction as understanding dawned on his face. "You can't," she continued, "because there aren't any others. Whatever Adrian did to earn your hatred, it wasn't this. This isn't his usual method of operation. Emma, tell me what he really did to you." She leaned forward, studying the man who'd raised her. 15 years ago. "What happened that made you hate him enough to sacrifice me for revenge?" Richard's face crumpled, years of carefully maintained composure finally breaking apart. "When he spoke, his voice was thick with old pain. He saved my daughter's life." Emma blinked, certain she'd misheard. "What, Sarah? My daughter Sarah?" Richard's hands trembled as he reached for a framed photograph Emma had never seen before. It showed a young woman with her father's eyes and a bright, infectious smile. She was dying. "Leukemia." "I'd exhausted every option, spent everything I had on experimental treatments." Then Adrian appeared. "I don't understand. He was nobody then. 20 years old, already making millions in tech startups. He heard about Sarah's case somehow, contacted the best specialists in the world, flew her to Switzerland for treatment I could never afford." Richard's voice broke. "He saved her life, and he asked for nothing in return." Emma felt the world tilt sideways. Then why? Because a year later, she fell in love with him. The pieces began clicking into place, forming a picture Emma didn't want to see. "Richard, what did you do?" She was 19. He was 21. "I thought he was manipulating her, using her gratitude to control her. I convinced her he was dangerous, that he'd grow tired of her and discard her like all rich men discard their toys." Tears ran down Richard's weathered cheeks. "I made her choose between him and her family, and she chose family. She chose me." Richard's voice was barely a whisper. "And then she spent the next 3 years slowly dying from the inside out. Depression, anxiety, a series of increasingly destructive relationships. She overdosed on pills when she was 22. Emma closed her eyes, feeling sick. She killed herself. The note said she couldn't live with the choice she'd made. Said she'd lost the only man who'd ever truly loved her because of her coward father's fears." Richard looked up at Emma with eyes full of guilt and rage. Adrian didn't even attend the funeral, but he sent flowers. White roses, her favorites. The office fell silent except for the tick of an old clock on the wall. Emma stared at Richard, finally understanding the twisted logic that had brought them all to this moment. "So you blamed him for Sarah's death?" she said. "Even though you were the one who destroyed their relationship? He should have fought harder." "For her," Richard said desperately. "He should have refused to let her go. He was 21 years old," Emma snapped. "He probably thought he was doing the noble thing by respecting her choice. And now he's doing the same thing to you that he did to her. Making you dependent on him, isolating you from everyone who cares about you." Emma laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You're the one who isolated me, Richard. You sold me to him like property. Adrian gave me power, respect, a future. You gave me betrayal. I was trying to protect you from making Sarah's mistake." "No." Emma stood, her decision crystallizing with each word. "You were trying to ease your own guilt by making Adrian the villain in a tragedy you created." She moved toward the door, but Richard's voice stopped her. "If you walk out of here, I'll release those photographs to every media outlet in the city. The world will see Adrian Blackwood's newest victim. Watch you become another casualty of his manipulation." Emma turned back, and the expression on her face made Richard shrink in his chair. "Do it," she said softly. "Release the photos. Tell the world whatever story you want. But know that when you do, I'll tell them the truth about Sarah. About how you destroyed your own daughter's happiness and then spent 15 years trying to destroy the man she loved." Richard's face went white. "Emma, I'm done being your pawn, Richard. And I'm done letting you use your dead daughter to justify your cruelty." Emma walked out of the office and didn't look back. Behind her, she could hear Richard calling her name, but the sound felt distant and unimportant. She had a choice to make, and for the first time in months, she knew exactly what she wanted to do. Adrian was waiting in the lobby of Sterling's building, his face etched with worry and something that might have been hope. He looked up as she approached, searching her expression for some indication of her decision. "How did you know I was here?" Emma asked. Margaret saw Richard's message. "I figured you'd want to face him alone, but I couldn't stay away." Adrian's voice was carefully controlled, but Emma could see the fear in his eyes. "What did he tell you?" Emma reached out and took his hand, feeling the calluses on his palms, the slight tremor that ran through him at her touch. "He told me about Sarah." Adrian went very still. "Emma, why didn't you tell me?" "Because it doesn't change anything," Adrian said quietly. "I still became the monster he thought I was. I still spent 15 years destroying people to fill the emptiness she left behind." Emma squeezed his hand tighter. "What do you know what I think what?" "I think you spent 15 years punishing yourself for loving someone who was too broken to love you back. I think you became exactly what Richard accused you of being because it was easier than admitting you were just a man who lost the woman he loved." Tears tracked down Adrian's cheeks, and Emma reached up to brush them away with her free hand. "I think," she continued, "that it's time to stop letting dead people and broken fathers define who we are." Adrian pulled her into his arms then, holding her with desperate intensity. Emma could feel his heart hammering against her chest, could smell the familiar scent of his cologne mixed with rain and fear and hope. "I love you," he whispered against her hair. "I love you so much it terrifies me." "I love you too," Emma replied, and felt some fundamental shift in the universe as she spoke the words. "But loving each other isn't enough. We have to choose to be better than what was done to us." Adrian pulled back to look at her face. "What are you saying?" Emma smiled, and for the first time in months, it felt completely genuine. "I'm saying we save Morrison Holdings. Together, we prove that love can build instead of just destroy." "Emma, the financial exposure alone, I don't care." She cupped his face in her hands, memorizing the sharp angles and storm-colored eyes. "I'd rather lose everything with you than win everything without you." Adrian stared at her for a long moment, then began to laugh. It started as a quiet chuckle, but built into something wild and free, the sound of chains breaking and cages opening. "You realize we'll probably go bankrupt," he said. "Probably. Richard will never forgive us for choosing each other over his revenge fantasy. Definitely. And the media will have a field day when those photos surface." Emma kissed him then, soft and sweet and full of promise. When they broke apart, both were breathless. "Let them," she whispered. Let the whole world watch us choose love over destruction. Maybe we'll start a trend. 3 months later, Emma stood in the renovated offices of Morrison Holdings. Watching James Morrison sign the partnership agreement that would save his family's business, the man looked like he'd aged a decade in the past 6 months, but his eyes were bright with tears of relief. "I don't understand why you're doing this," he said to Adrian. After everything that happened, Adrian glanced at Emma, who was standing by the window watching Manhattan pulse with life beyond the glass. "Someone taught me that it's never too late to choose who you want to be." The photographs had been released, just as Richard had threatened. The media had indeed had a field day, painting Emma as either a victim of corporate manipulation or a gold-digging opportunist. But the stories had been overwhelmed by a larger narrative: the redemption of Adrian Blackwood, the corporate raider, who'd given up his empire to save the companies he'd once destroyed. They'd lost most of their fortune in the process. The penthouse was gone, replaced by a modest apartment in Brooklyn. The designer suits had been traded for clothes from actual stores with prices normal people could afford. But Emma had never been happier. "Any regrets?" Adrian asked, as they walked home through the evening crowd. Emma considered the question seriously. She thought about the life she could have had if she'd accepted Richard's version of events. If she'd chosen safety over love, if she'd let fear make her decisions. "Only one," she said. Adrian's step faltered. "What?" Emma stopped walking and turned to face him, causing pedestrians to flow around them like water around stones. "I regret that it took us so long to figure out that we're better together than we ever were apart." Adrian's smile was radiant, transforming his face from handsome to beautiful. He pulled her close and spun her around, both of them laughing like children as the city swirled around them. Later that night, as they lay tangled together in their small bed, Emma traced the scars on Adrian's arms that she'd finally asked about. Each one told a story of a childhood marked by neglect and violence. Of a young man who'd built walls so high he'd forgotten how to let anyone in. "Do you think Sarah would approve?" Emma asked quietly. Adrian was quiet for so long that Emma thought he'd fallen asleep. Then she felt his lips press against her temple. "I think she'd be happy that we found each other," he said. "I think she'd want us to build something beautiful." Emma closed her eyes and listened to the sound of Adrian's heartbeat, steady and strong beneath her ear. Outside their window, Manhattan glittered with a million lights, each one representing a dream, a hope, a second chance. They'd lost an empire, but gained something infinitely more valuable: the knowledge that love was the only victory worth fighting for, and that redemption was always possible for those brave enough to choose it. In the morning, they would start building their new life together. Brick by brick, choice by choice, guided by the radical belief that broken people could heal each other, if they were willing to do the work. But tonight, they held each other in the darkness and whispered promises about the future they would create together. Two damaged souls who'd found their way home at last. Asterisk, asterisk, comment below. Team Emma or Team Adrian? And what would you do if you discovered someone had been manipulating your entire life? Don't forget to smash that like button if this story gave you all the feels. Hit subscribe and ring the notification bell for more addictive stories. Share with anyone who loves complex romance and morally gray characters. The end.